It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogstye Network, the show where we look at the dollars and the cents of the sports media industrial complex. As always, my co-host, the intrepid Steve. How you doing?
I am doing okay. If I'm suffering through a bit of congestion right now, so if my voice sounds weird, that's what it is. But all is well down here in Tejas. How about you?
Enjoying the last gasps of summer and all that, but generally can't complain.
Sorry, you're still in New York.
Yeah, my favorite state. But we did just spend a lovely weekend last weekend, long weekend in Montreal, which I'd never been to. It's a lovely city. It's also had a almost 100-degree heat wave, so the going even further north did not help that. But it's a lovely city. If anyone has a chance to go, they should.
I've never been to Montreal.
It's pretty great. It's like being in it's like Europe. It's like going to Paris, but not having to deal with the grief.
Yeah, because you've never been to Paris. They don't particularly appreciate Americans there. Say it like that.
Yeah, and right now air travel is a disaster. So we're like, oh, where's somewhere we can go where we kind of feel like we went to a different country? Because in fact, we did go to a different country, and feels kind of similar and foreign at the same time. And we can only drive 5 hours. And I was like, oh, Montreal.
Yeah, sounds good. So hey, I'm glad you went. All of that. So I have not been anywhere. I went to Nashville last weekend. Other than that, it's been a bust.
I don't feel like I can't feel alive unless I know where my next vacation is.
Well, you see, in my well-documented health problems, which I wrote a column about several months ago, um, have kept me in place. So things have gotten much better though. But so things have taken a turn for the better, which is good. But I'm still a little bit leery of traveling too much.
That
So,
sounds prudent.
well, yeah, I mean, somebody's asked me, for example, to go up to a cabin in the middle of the mountains in New Mexico, and I thought, I'd love to go. Don't get me wrong, but sounds sounds a bit removed from everything for me.
I imagine there's not a great medical facility in the near.
No, that's the problem. Yeah, it's not exactly a hub of elite cardiology there in the
It's
mountains of New Mexico.
well, hopefully you feel healthy and confident enough to take a rain check later date
Absolutely.
because that does actually sound pretty nice.
Oh, it does. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to do it. It just makes me a little nervous. That's all. Because I think if something happened, I would be, dead.
Yeah, you'd be relying on the black bear.
Yeah, exactly. That wouldn't do well. It wouldn't do much.
Well, before we get going on the important topics, Steve, we're one episode away from the end of Better Call Saul. Did you have your feelings a little bit relieved this past week? I thought it was a pretty great episode.
Yeah, I thought, and by the time everybody hears this, the conclusion will have happened.
Oh, that's right. Yep.
But yeah, last week the penultimate episode I thought was much better. I thought of all the black and white ones, which I think have all been weaker generally than the rest of the series, this one was the best one. And not just because Kim surfaced, but I thought it was a pretty realistic turn for her character. She's tired of Jimmy. If Jimmy had never called her, she wouldn't have gone through all of this and turned him in and all of that. I thought it was a pretty good episode. I mean, certainly, I think this is my prediction. That we'll know it's true or not by the time this airs. I think I think Jimmy's going to get arrested, and the series ends. This is my prediction for the final scene. They haul Jimmy into court as a defendant, and then it cuts to black. Because the whole show is about Jimmy's, in the court and his turn from Jimmy McGill to Saul Goodman, everything. And so that's been the theme of the show. So I think he defends himself. Because at first I thought maybe Kim would do it, but no, Kim turned him in, and she's a fact witness. She can't defend him, even if she wanted to. So I think that's the end. He defends himself. Cut to black.
That's a good guess. I'll look forward to. I'll say this, Steve. You called it, which I don't. I didn't disagree with, but you were pretty prescient when you said you don't bring in Carol Burnett. Just do like one kitchen schnapps scene. So yeah, we got a pretty definitive. I mean, she had a pretty pivotal plot moment on many different levels. So yeah, which I thought was actually pretty powerful. I did enjoy seeing Carol Burnett in that scene, in all of her scenes, but that was pretty powerful stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just thought, why are you going to pay a big name to play a part that is irrelevant? So it was obvious from the start that she had a big part, and kudos to the character for having the foresight to press her little life alert thing.
Yeah, I've fallen and I can't get up. And I also thought it was funny that she was on for our older fans out here, since the internet's been around forever, that she found his videos through Ask Jeeves.
I know.
That's what she said.
Well, it's also pretty ironic that who's the one who taught her to search for anything in the first place was Jimmy.
Yep, and that she has the computer at all because of the money that they'd made on that first scam.
Yeah. So in a way, he brought around his own demise.
Yeah, on multiple levels.
Yeah, I mean, he was obviously asking for it by breaking into the house again, or by doing anything in the first place.
Edge.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it should be good. I'll just because I'll throw my. I don't really have a hard feeling about this, but I'll throw my guess in. I almost think we see him. I could see a prison scene, so same sort of general conclusion as you, but maybe as a final scene, a prison scene with him like sort of, kind of doing his Saul, Jimmy McGill, prison house lawyer type of like, mastermind. Maybe we see him, like running his scams or somehow pulling strings in prison.
That would be a decent ending also. It sort of conforms to the show. So that's good. I thought you were going to say where he, drops the soap and then gets scared or something.
I did see where Vince Gilligan and Peter Gould did say in something, I think this week, and because they've been obviously doing a lot of press, that they think killing a character is kind of a cop out, because then you just sort of absolve them all by their crimes or whatever by death, and so I don't think he ends up dead.
Yeah, well, the analogy to me is if you've seen The Shield. Did you watch The Shield?
I have not. It's one of my gaps.
Okay, so to spoil it for you, I won't spoil it too much, but the show revolves around a group of corrupt LA cops. It's based on the Rampart scandal from 20 years ago, something like that. When a bunch of cops in the anti-drug division were just corrupt. That's sort of the model. And the ending of the show conforms to what you're saying is you don't die. They had to come up with another bad way to make this bad character pay, and I think that's where we're going to go with, because they can't let Jimmy get away with all this. After everything he's done, he can't just walk. So yeah, he's going to, one way or the other, he's ended up in court, in prison, somewhere.
Yeah, if your evidence is that Jimmy's not that bad a guy because he didn't strangle Carol Burnett with a phone cord.
Congratulations, you didn't commit murder.
Yeah, right. I'm an old defenseless lady and Hollywood legend.
I mean, he's not as bad as Walter White. Certainly, Walter White was just a murderer. God knows how many people he killed by the end of the show, but he's still a criminal.
Yeah, no, they wanted to show you that he had some semblance of a moral code there, something hanging on by a thread.
But you know what? But all of Jimmy's scams in the early days really revolved ultimately around beating somebody in court. Wherein in these past couple of black and white episodes, this is just flat out criminal like fraud and theft. He did kind of step it up in his criminal life a little bit in a way that hadn't really happened before.
No, it's gotten, you start off as a Wall Street banker enjoying high-end cocaine, and you end up in a back alley, with bathtub crack, things happen.
Yeah, hey.
That's a different show, maybe.
Yeah, it is.
which is probably already on TV. All right, so there you go. There's our, you only have, we'll probably do a little bit of recap in our next show, but then there's the end of our TV corner with Better Call Saul. So let's jump into, sort of more organized scams, schemes, and bamboozlement, and that is college athletics. So got some pretty, the news on college athletics is pretty much ongoing. I think, if you charted our last 25 episodes, we've talked about college athletics on 21 of them. Would probably be my, off the hand guess. But some pretty big news in terms of a new lawsuit that's making its way and had a ruling that does not bode well for the NCAA. And reality is that, the variety of armies are gathering at the border of college athletics. But Steve, as our show lawyer, just let us know what actually happened with this newest case.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I did not have time to pull all these petitions, all these pleadings, and read them personally. So I'm relying on the article we found about it, which is it's with The Athletic, called "Understanding Johnson v. NCAA: The Next Case That Could Upend the College Sports Model" by Nicole Auerbach and Mike Vorkunov. I wonder if Auerbach is Brett Auerbach. Anyway, so this is the Johnson case. Johnson is Ralph Trey Johnson, who was a player for the Villanova football team, and he's basically alleged, like many other cases in the past, that college athletes should be recognized as employees of the school they attend under the Fair Labor Standards Act. He's also alleged that the NCAA is a joint employer alongside the school. This case has now become a class action, so it's a big case. It's in the Third District Court of Appeals, Third Circuit Court of Appeals right now. So the trial court, which is the federal district court, apparently refused to dismiss this case out of hand and sent a question to the appellate court asking whether athletes could be considered under certain circumstances as employees at all. So they're waiting on the Third Circuit to answer that. If the answer is no, they can't be, then the case goes away, maybe appealed to the Supreme Court. If the answer is yes, they can be employees, then it becomes a question for the trial court again. Are they, under the circumstances set out by the appellate court? So that is the case. Now, what I didn't realize, it cites NLRB, which is National Labor Relations Board, General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo apparently wrote in a memo last fall that she believed, and her legal opinion was, that college football players and certain other athletes in revenue sports are employees of the schools. Now, that's just that is just the opinion of the NLRB General Counsel, which frankly isn't exactly impartial here, but nonetheless. So there's a whole string. This article goes into it in pretty good detail, but there's been a whole string of cases about this, and all of them so far have ruled against the NCAA. Now, this article cites one particular case called Alston from a couple years ago, which is a Supreme Court case, and everybody's made a big deal of the concurrence of Brett Kavanaugh, which apparently he wrote for himself, not a slew of other justices, in which Kavanaugh hinted around that maybe students can be employees. And so everybody took that to be a win for the athletes, in spite of the fact that the majority didn't say anything about it. So that's that. I think obviously the net effect of this could be huge, right? Because we already have the NIL stuff. If there's a finding that athletes could be employees, then athletes can unionize. And that, I think, my friends, would probably be realistically the end of the NCAA model. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, who knows how some of that's going to go? And obviously, I think we've got different federal courts with differencing of opinions, which potentially forces us to the Supreme Court, because I've got to sort out, the differences of opinions between these federal regional courts, I, I'm a bit in over my head at some point here, but you know, there's a lot of different angles about. So this is now sort of almost just a federal judicial issue in terms of how to handle the decision making and the ruling as much as anything else. So it's just so complex. And to me, it's really just how many existential threats the NCAA has, right? Like, so we're not talking about one, we're talking about ranking the level of risk or threat. And from how you describe this one probably shoots up into the top three, you know, at worst, in terms of threats to the NCAA and things that could really be that kind of guillotine moment for the NCAA. I did enjoy in this athletic article that they used my intro verbiage to sort of describe really how much is going on with them. And they say the case is taking place while the entire collegiate athletic industrial complex finds itself in the crosshairs of Congress. So I just want to call out our shared language there. But what, Steve, in your opinion or your legal opinion, if this was all happening 3 years ago, let's call it, before the NIL Mishigosh, would this be different? Because it seems to me, as I kind of like my amateur read of this, is that if the NIL stuff hadn't happened, which sort of blows open, or actually doesn't blow open, it put into question the actually amateurism of these athletes and allowing, you know, and sort of changing the definition of what an amateur athlete is in a collegiate sense. Did that change the calculus here for these kinds of suits to have legitimacy, where 3 years ago, if everyone was underneath this sort of like idea that these were amateur athletics and they couldn't earn any money and all the kind of, you know, kind of the, let's call it 2020 understanding of these athletes, would these lawsuits have more trouble proceeding, or has it been that that part is so fundamentally changed that there are paths forward for these kinds of cases?
Well, it's two totally different questions. I do think that people have been emboldened to file these more, but again, this Johnson case is not nearly the first one. People have made this argument for decades. The NIL question is really a question of the NCAA's definition of what an amateur is. That's what NIL is. Whereas this is, are you an employee? I think it's a totally separate legal issue. Are you an employee means, do you have the protections of employees? You know, because there's federal law, there's state law, there's ERISA, all kinds of stuff. You know, again, unionization. I don't think NIL has anything to do with it. So no, I don't think that, other than emboldening people to make these claims more, I don't think the NIL issues really have anything to do with it. No. Now, the interesting part of this lawsuit was Johnson's allegation that the NCAA is a joint employer. I mean, he's trying to, the ultimate goal with that argument is then you have a nationwide union of college athletes. The interesting part of this to me, though, one of the other interesting part of this to me is the distinguishment apparently that has been made between revenue generating sport athletes and non-revenue generating sport athletes. Because it's one thing to say you have to pay, you know, football players some small amount of money. You have to play basketball players a small amount of money. Every other sport in NCAA is a loss leader. Even baseball, which there may be a few schools that make money on baseball, but by and large, every other sport, including women's basketball, is a loss leader. So then, what do you do about payment? Um, and the other thing is what happens to Title IX. This article, this column makes reference to possibly if they're employees and that Title IX becomes inapplicable, which would allow universities to have a lot more leeway with how they handle their non-revenue generating sports. So while I don't agree that NIL has anything to do with it, I think there are a lot more issues than people realize here.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah, and I think that makes sense to me. And I was almost more talking about the embolden, or, you know, just
well, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly people have been emboldened, you know, to do this more because of NIL. Yeah.
And it's just that it, like before, there was sort of terra firma and, 3 years ago on some of this. It might have been held together by tradition, spit, and duct tape.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was right. Like, but something has burst, I think, which has just changed the whole scenario here. And you're right. It was really kind of interesting to me that the arguments here, say, is there a legal or employer type of difference between the left tackle for Alabama and a kid on work study, or the student, the Alabama student that manages the concession stand on game day? There's parts of this lawsuit, or just this more sort of existential question at large about, is there a actual difference between those two kinds of employees in a university structure?
Well, yeah, and the other question I would ask is there a difference between the left tackle at Alabama and somebody on, the women's golf team?
Right. And we've talked about this many times, that if they can carve out that distinction, which probably you could slot in every college athlete except a male basketball player. So we sort of we're that's what I'm saying. Like, except basketball player, male basketball players and football players.
Right.
They're the only two. They're the unique ones, right? Like, they're the ones that are the special case. The rest of college athletics, and that doesn't mean certain, of course, some places might make a little bit of money on some, smaller sport because of the region they're in, but we're talking pennies, right? The colleges aren't banking on this. It might be nice that they're running in the black and not the red on, women's volleyball in California, but it's not driving the university economics the way that basketball and football is. So we've talked probably for years at this point, is if they can carve out some kind of legal policy distinction between, this goes to Title IX, this goes to college, all kinds of distinctions in college athletics and college, really, economics and finance. If they can get some kind of universal ruling or some kind of understanding that those things are different and draw a line there, then we're going to see this just explode.
Now, I'd point out that this is at a federal appellate court, not the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court in the past has poured this argument out. It was this concurring opinion from Justice Kavanaugh in this other case, Alston, that caused people to believe that maybe there is a glimmer of hope. The NCAA in the Johnson arguments has relied on stare decisis, which is the concept that you have to follow along with precedent. Now, if there's anything we've seen recently with the opinion in the abortion case, Dobbs out of Mississippi, it's that the Supreme Court is willing to take a contrary opinion when they think it's right. And stare decisis does not automatically mean you have to follow precedent. If you did, there wouldn't ever have to be another case, about it. So while stare decisis is important, and probably I think the appellate court is stuck with this, what the Supreme Court says. If this case goes to the Supreme Court, they could change their mind, if they think the law was wrong previously. So just don't take an opinion by the Third Circuit Court of Appeals as gospel, because odds are it will end up in front of the Supreme Court a couple years later. Yeah, I mean, look, we've talked for years on this show about how the NCAA, the entire business model, is flawed. It's a poorly run organization. A lot of things need to change. That having been said, for me, Chris, I'm not necessarily convinced it's like a moral imperative, forget the legal question, that these athletes need to be paid. For one thing, the football and basketball players are all on scholarship, so they are getting compensated for their efforts. They're just not getting cash. But it's still compensation, and it's a lot of money in some cases. Now, there's not as many scholarship athletes on the other non-revenue sports, but on basketball and football, virtually all of them are on scholarship. So I don't think it's accurate to say they're not getting any money at all or any compensation at all.
Yeah, I mean, I just, and there's validity to those arguments and so on and so forth. I just think I put that in the like. I just don't know how relevant that argument is anymore. Just not in terms of like right or wrong or moral or ideological. I just think that the policy and legal stuff has moved so far past this that like that argument, those kind of arguments aren't gonna hold, right? Like we're talking about heck, we just talked about precedent in the Supreme Court, right? We talked about some real I just don't see how those are the things, those are the arguments and the sort of rationale that held us together for so long, for the better part of what, 60, 70, 80 years. I just don't know if those things, those seem sort of antiquated at this point in terms of the level of debate on this.
Well, yeah, that, and also the question of employee status isn't necessarily wrapped around the type and amount of compensation either. There are other factors that go into it, and I am not an expert in labor law. It's not my area. I'm not going to pretend I am, but there are a set of factors that go into determination of whether someone is an employee. Certainly compensation is one of them, but there's a lot of things. Um, so that's not necessarily the be all end all. I'm just saying the idea of football players saying they're not getting compensated isn't really true. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because they are. And again, from like a moral standard standpoint, also not sure I like the idea of amateur student athletes getting a truckload of money. I don't know if that's good for the sport, good for college athletics, all of that. I don't know. I'm not convinced. Um, anyway, so that's sort of the case. Um, Again, it's very complicated. There's a number of guiding precedents. The NCAA, like I said, is sort of relied on the other opinions, the previous opinions, wherein the plaintiffs have relied on the fact that Justice Kavanaugh left the door open in his concurring opinion. So we will see what happens. Certainly, an opinion in favor of the players will throw everything into more chaos than it already is in.
Yeah, and I think the headline here is not, I mean, although it's a pretty substantial story and a pretty substantial lawsuit, I don't want to undercut that. But what I think is just ultimately the story is just, even if they survive this case, right, or it gets thrown out or whatever, it's one of many, right? It's just a barrage, like it's just under the idea of college athletics, especially at the big two, we'll call it, is just under a full assault on all sides. And there's just, I don't see any, I mean, we already saw a seismic shift, right? So like we're kind of talking, we're in a kind of post seismic shift world already. But I don't see how any of this really holds.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's the beginning of the end for the NCAA. It's just a matter of how long it takes, more than anything. NIL, to me, was a seismic shift in college football, in that what it has created is the ability of players to transfer in a year, almost overnight, chasing more money. And so that all by itself has upended the model to me. And they can't ever go back. Like you and I have said many times on this show, the NCAA really ought to go away, and they ought to come up with a new model, for this. I don't see how it continues. I don't know how long it's going to take, but at some point, this whole college athletic system is going to be different.
Oh yeah, I mean, and it's becoming more different almost every day, right? It's like fluid. It's very fluid. It's not like it used to be A and now it's B. It's like
I don't
it's like a
necessarily think
river.
I don't necessarily think NIL is a great thing. Allowing guys to basically legal blackmail their universities and say, listen, if you don't find NIL money for me of this much, I'm going to go transfer to this other school. I mean, part of me says that's not necessarily a great thing for the sports.
Well, I think anytime you go from a hard line to blowing open the doors. There's all the stream of unintended consequences and unforeseen mutations, so to speak, is right. So like, there could have been a world where they took steps, they got ahead of this, they planned, they didn't, but that didn't happen. It was a stone wall, and then a battering ram, and then the stone wall crumbled in a matter of months, and now everyone's figuring it out in real time, which is going to mean more lawsuits, more like different groups crossing a line. Well, let's see what they do here. So we went from a highly controlled territory, to the Wild West in a snap of a finger.
Well, yeah. Now, I don't think the NCAA is just going to roll over like they did on NIL. They kind of got put in a box by laws passed in California and a couple other states. But I think under no circumstance is the NCAA going to willingly allow a labor union to be formed. Now, they may be forced to, don't get me wrong, but the idea that they're just going to cave and call them employees, which then creates a union that they have to negotiate with, I don't think they will ever voluntarily agree to that. So I think they will go down swinging with this, even though, frankly, they probably ought to reach a compromise.
Yeah. And, lest we think it's just the players here or, the athletes, kind of rewriting the rules of college athletics and college tradition. What we're seeing happening in these conferences is doing similar damage, or just is the similar version of the Wild West here too, and not quite frankly, but obviously a follow the money, cash grab, new economics thing too. And well, we won't go too deep into that. I did want to note that this week it looks like ESPN has pulled out of their negotiations with the Big Ten for a new Big Ten contract for television rights, which ESPN has held for since 1982, I believe. So almost 40-ish years, unbelievably so. And now they already had a deal with Fox, and I think CBS would step in. And ESPN is going to start a giant contract with the SEC. So I don't think it really says anything about ESPN necessarily, but it just is another data point about when you get to that top level, right? At the sort of administrative and what these conferences and what these schools decide to do, they're not sticking to tradition or how things operated or even any kind of sensical arrangement of these conferences either. So there's also that stressor of terms of, there's free agency for these universities in terms of what's the best TV contract, conglomerate to get involved with as well. So that's also pushing this.
I do think it may say something about ESPN, actually. I think ESPN has been floundering for a while. And part of the reason they're floundering is we went over this a couple years ago. I remember I pulled a list of all the contracts they had, and it was just some like enormous number. They spent a ton of money. Their viewership is not what it was. Part of me says that they didn't want the expense of having the Big Ten on their books anymore when they found a better replacement. If they had the same unlimited pot of money that they've always had, they could possibly do both. Because there's enough ESPN networks, so they could probably televise all those games. So I do think it says something about that. But the other thing it says is it just acknowledges the dominance of the SEC in college football. And by the way, the Big Ten is the second strongest conference out there, and they just got unceremoniously dumped in favor of the SEC. I mean, the SEC just dominates the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked many times about how eventually ESPN is going to have to tighten up how much like live sports licenses that they pay for.
Yeah, it was an insane number. I can't remember what the number was. It was a crazy big number.
But so I do think so. They're making decisions then about, well, if we have the SEC, why bother? overpaying for other conferences, especially where the trend is that, it's not inconceivable that you see a Michigan or Ohio State or, another Big Ten stalwart jump to the SEC. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but that sounds crazy because our own brains. It doesn't sound, it's not crazy in the current economics of college athletics. And I would, in fact, at this point, be shocked if you didn't see a Big Ten school over the next, I'll even be conservative, the next 5 years jump over to the SEC.
Well, maybe, but I think they'll pick over the rotting carcasses of the other conferences first.
Yeah,
Because
for sure.
The Big Ten's the only one that's viable anymore. I mean, the Big 12 is shell of itself. I think the ACC is next, to get rated. And then, at that point, then maybe someone jumps over from the Big Ten to the SEC. I mean, and if that happens, the SEC would be wise to just form their own entity.
Yeah.
This
That's been our
divorces.
That's been our end prediction on almost any version of this story. It
Yeah.
ends there.
And I mean, just separated themselves from the NCAA, form their own, call it what you want, college sports association, college football, anything. It's a really bad name. Don't ask me to name stuff. But point is, at some point, it's going to be too big for the NCAA, even if the NCAA continues to exist.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a big traditionalist, or I just, even things that I wish stayed the same, I just sort of realize that they're just not going to. But the one thing that I do feel a little bit sad about, I'll get emo, and I think at some point calmer heads should prevail, is you can't let the behemoth that is college football is even starting to cannibalize the behemoth that is college men's basketball, because I mean, this just runs rough. This has happened already and is continuing to happen. It run roughshod over the traditions of college basketball. I mean, you talk about the destruction of the Big East, the destruction of the ACC, and these kinds of things. At some point, you would have just hoped that decouple that a little bit, like, allow, I don't know if it's possible, and it probably isn't probable, but these machinations in football have these consequences in college men's basketball that are just, really do damage to the sport. And that's at some point, that's a golden goose still. I mean, the March Madness is still a giant economic driver. We saw it snap back this last year, kind of from their, kind of pandemic dip. So it had resiliency. And so at some point, though, at what risk does the madness in college football really, have long-lasting damage in college basketball? That's one of the interesting things to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there are a limited number of teams or schools that play at different levels, that may be Division I for college football and then Division II for other sports. So there is a limited number of that, but that's not the case. These are all smaller schools that do that, not any of the big schools at all. So, yeah, I mean, people need to remember that I think I'm right to say that March Madness is the second biggest sporting event of the year behind, in terms of economics, behind the Super Bowl. I believe that is the case. And it's certainly a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a significant source of funds for college athletics. So, yes, college football is cannibalizing, and cannibalization is affecting others. It's affecting basketball, yes. But the NCAA would be wise to do whatever it can to keep March Madness alive, just from a money perspective.
Yeah. And yes, totally. So it's just fascinating that even, even the big two, as one is affecting the other. It really, and so at some point, if the NCAA has to go into defense mode at some point, like firewalling football from men's college basketball probably is one of the places I would start to build that firewall.
Yeah, but I mean, what can you really do about it? I mean, are you gonna have schools play in the SEC for football and then the ACC for basketball?
Maybe. I mean, especially if they somehow separated, if college football, like, the sort of SEC was its own entity, and you allowed allowances for that school. If that was its own thing, they could do their thing, and you could still have the Florida State and the ACC or whatever for all the rest of athletics.
I do think that would be easier if they would do what we are suggesting, which is to just pull out entirely and create the whatever you want to call it, Southern College Football Network, something association, and then just say we're not a part of the NCAA anymore. All of other sports are going to remain in the NCAA, including basketball, and then all these basketball teams can just continue to do what they do. I think it'd be easier if they just totally got out of the current setup of college football. So that's again the prediction here is that there will at some point be another organization entirely that used to be the SEC that is now something else. And I actually think if they took that big leap, it would be a little easier to deal with.
Yeah, I definitely think some version. I mean, how we get there and what forces it, and are they proactive or reactive? All that stuff will be decided. But I think that I think it's still, it's just business's philosophy that is the path towards sanity.
Oh, absolutely. What is it about? It's all about the money. It's always about the money. So how can they make more money? It's probably not by unintentionally harming March Madness, but it's also not by continuing to be subservient to the NCAA. So ultimately, a separation, I think, would make everybody more money. Now, again, it might be contrary to what some people believe is amateurism in sports, college sports, but I think the ship has sailed on that. Even though I am a traditionalist and I do kind of like it, I think the ship has sailed.
And so how this will affect you this fall and in the next couple of weeks is for you college football fans is when you turn on, and I think this was in John Oleran said it or somewhere somebody said it. When you turn on ESPN's College Game Day Saturday morning, don't expect to be in Michigan or Ohio or these, their setups because they do that they set up in where their featured game is and do it with a crowd and the college, the kids behind them yelling and screaming. That's not going to be, that's going to be starts being SEC cities there and
it'll be
no
heavily Southern oriented. Yeah, the days of them showing up in Columbus, Ann Arbor, Columbus, Chicago, Northwestern are probably over.
For sure. So this is how that'll manifest on your TV here in mid-October. So speaking of a story that we seem to even when we try to avoid, we have a hard time avoiding is this like endless melodrama around LIV golf and the PGA and what players are playing here and again. We take us right back to labor law disputes, right, Steve?
Yeah. So first, before I get there, I'm trying to find this. And of course, now I can't. We got a comment a while ago from a listener rather, who said, "Hey, I like the show." And I'm sorry, I'm just having trouble finding it here in my phone. No, that's not it. Anyway, and he said, "Hey, I think you guys are missing the point here about LIV Live Golf, which isn't that the Saudis are in it for profit. They're in it just kind of as a what's the word? I forget the word he used. They're just in it for the glory of being around a bunch of athletes, basically." That's what he was saying. And again, I just can't find the comment. Sorry. But I'd just like to say we said that. We both said that that's a possibility. All our point was it's not really totally clear. That's all. And to that person whose name I can't find, sorry for losing it. But I wanted to. Is that it right there? I'm hunting on the fly here through my. Okay, yeah, I must not have anymore. But anyway, so there's that. So yeah, so the latest thing here, it's just the gift that keeps on giving. It really is. The latest thing is that Phil Mickelson, DeChambeau, and a bunch of other players have now sued the PGA Tour alleging antitrust violations, which also we said could be a thing. I would like to point out. And so they are claiming that the PGA Tour's suspension of these is an antitrust problem. What antitrust is basically that a company gets too big and they have too much control of the market, and then they're using unfair practices to squash out competition. Again, think like AT&T in the 80s. So that's the allegation here. Again, to folks like Chris and I, this is just the gift that keeps on giving. So it's 11, a total of 11. Oh, by the way, the story that, if you want to read this, is from CNBC. Mickelson, DeChambeau, and other live golfers file antitrust lawsuit over PGA Tour over suspensions. Published and updated August 3rd by Jack Stebbins and Jessica Golden. That's the story. So anyway, that's what these players are alleging. They're saying, hey, the fact that you are banning us from the FedEx Cup in particular, which is like the golf playoff system, is an antitrust violation. They may have a point. I think they have a bet less than zero chance of winning this, but we'll see. So that is the latest in the Live Tour, Chris.
It's so funny. We have talked about this probability, and probably that this was part of the end goal of these players, or some of these players anyway. That when I saw the story, my brain was like, "Wait, hasn't this already happened?" Like, you know, yeah, I had already. My assumption became so strong that I actually thought it was reality. So, yeah. So I find this 0% shocking. That this is the next step and where this has gone. So this just seems obvious, right? This seems like one of the goals is to be able to file this lawsuit, and to set up a a kind of a conflict to force this issue. So this to me just seems like the next obvious thing that was going to happen in this whole bit. And yeah, to that, well, first of all, thank you for listening and thank you for commenting, and that is actually a prescient comment. I agree with Steve. I think we had talked about this, and to some degree the Saudis are, this family that this version of the Saudis is so rich. It's like, it's like the individual person that overspends at an art auction just because they can, or buys a, Babe Ruth's baseball, or, something along those lines just because they can, right? Like, to me, that's what the Live Golf is. It is an entry into a certain class, a certain, just because we can. It's showy. It does want to, it's paying to hang out with certain people. I always thought it was just a version of that.
Yeah, me too. Because it's obvious that the economics of it are way screwed up. I finally found the comment here. So the comment was from at BIX3177 from July 20th. He says, at Hogstye Love, it's just business pod. You guys don't seem to know a lot about the live golf stuff. The Saudis are, quote, sports washing, close quote, which is why they are paying out such big numbers to players. They aren't trying to turn a profit. So yeah, I mean, again, I think we did say that. So I just wanted to bring that up, and thanks for listening to this. So in terms of this, the legal case, I mean, this is another thing that isn't going to get resolved at a trial court. I think if the NCAA was smart, or not the NCAA, if the PGA was smart, they would just reach an agreement with Live Golf. I think we said this too, and to build golf brand internationally. Part of the problem here really is that the Saudi Arabian government, including the royal family itself, has a pretty long and distinguished history as a civil rights violator. And that's fundamentally why people have criticized Phil Mickelson. How can you jump into bed with people who are not good people? That's sort of the public complaint, and I get it, and that's probably why the PGA does not want to do this. But the truth is, I think you could maybe grow your brand if you do. But the public backlash may be too big for this.
Yes, I agree. I don't disagree with that at all. What I wonder though is how how big is the public backlash? Like, so we've seen enough of it, right? You see, I mean, whether it's DeChambeau or Mickelson, I mean, those are two of the let's just call it the top two names in golf, top 10 if you want to be really,
Two of them, certainly.
Yeah, right. So, and I don't, I know Phil Mickelson, he stepped in it because he opened his mouth too wide, which is one of Phil Mickelson's problems. But like if he was just a little bit more demure and just sort of kept it buttoned up, are these players or these tournaments really getting like public outcry? I almost wonder like if the fear of the outcry is bigger than the reality.
Well, yeah. So I think one of the reasons why everybody, including that commenter and us, think that this is more just a way for the Saudis to entertain themselves is that there's I've seen zero effort to get these tournaments on TV. Like absolutely none. Excuse me. And they're paying a fortune. I mean, they're sending these guys the live tour, sending them on private jets, expensive private jets. They're paying Phil Mickelson 9 figures. Who is watching these tournaments? Who is watching them? There may be fans there locally, but that does not pay those kind of bills. The only way you get those kind of bills paid is if there is a massive TV audience. And there isn't any TV audience that I know of. So, what is going on here? And again, I think that may be one sign that that guy is right and that this is not really about money for the Saudis.
Yeah, I mean, right. I mean, well, first of all, they don't need money, right? Like, so they're not.
No, they're rolling in dough.
Yeah, they're not out here like we must diversify our portfolio so that we can stay financially viable in a changing market. That's not the mentality there at the Saudi royal family.
They have a stupid amount of money. For those who don't understand this, so the Saudis have nationalized production of oil, and so the royal family basically has all the money. That's sort of what it boils down. They do have contracts with some American oil companies, whatnot, but essentially the royal family has a monopoly on Saudi Arabian oil production. And so that's why they have so much money. And so, yeah, it's not like a bunch of Saudi princes said, we need to diversify. Let's get into American sports. The odds are probably is let's have a bunch of celebrity athletes around us and go watch golf and get drunk. That's probably what's going on here.
And as that Twitter commenter, I think, by using the term washing, there's also I think he's also referring to reputational washing, right? Like, so if over the next 5 to 10 years, the Saudi royal family via Live Golf is the home of Phil Mickelson and DeChambeau. I mean, it does, the public perception of they're sponsoring golf or they're so eventually it also, so maybe it's diversifying their reputation, not their fiscal portfolio, but their reputational portfolio. That's certainly part of this too, because if you just get in people's brains that, oh, you can't be that evil if you're, making sure that, Phil Mickelson's playing golf. Now, to your point, at some point, the interesting part here, I think, what you've named is like, when's the TV contract? Not necessarily because they need to fill the coffers there, but because it's a legitimacy, right? And it also shows, is the reputation washing working? Because if it doesn't have to be even U.S., it could be international, but if some broadcaster or internet giant or whatever who can, let people watch in some capacity, ponies up and pays for the right to broadcast this, then that reputation, that's a pretty big sign in terms of, is this reputational washing working?
Well, that, and also, and even the Saudis don't want to just flush money down a toilet forever. Presumably they're willing to spend money, obviously, but I mean, they'd be crazy to just spend billions of dollars for no reason and getting nothing out of it. So there's that too. And yeah, I think some of this is probably, you're right. I mean, maybe they're hoping people will forget that they're the country that murdered an American journalist. The people forget that they're the country that has some of the worst treatment of women in the world. All of that. And if you see Phil Mickelson's shining face on like Fox or something on the Live Tour, I think it sets the bar a little higher in terms of public perception.
Yeah, I mean, this is already, I mean, Yes, people go to where we're going to with this, with international politics and finance and, global relations and all that stuff. But they've already done a pretty successful job of just making this a golf or a sports story, right? Like,
It's a sports story, but is it a sport? I mean, again, if nobody seriously, it's one of those kind of, if a tree falls in the woods, do you really hear it if nobody's there to hear it? I mean, it's almost like private royal family entertainment. It seems to me.
And this is where now I'm not. This is not a legal argument on by me, but you do have to wonder about these athletes, right? These golfers. They want it two ways at this point, right? They want to take the giant check, which is what they've done, right? They've said, yes, I will take that check, and then they want to be able to play within the confines of the actual sport with rules and regulations and a tour and a playoff
And the celebrity of it.
yeah, and TV contracts, and so that they kind of want to be barnstormers for the royal Saudi family, right? And take the check and do these kind of like, let's just call them pageant golf tournaments. And they want to be able to go and play in whatever they call this playoffs, and they want to show up at the U.S. Open and so on and so forth. So, really what they're fighting for is to have their cake and eat it too.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And, like I've said before, when PGA golfers go overseas, Tiger Woods routinely went to like Japan and played tournaments. The PGA Tour has to consent to this. The PGA Tour could consent to this if they wanted to. They just don't want to, probably because it's Saudi Arabia. And certainly these golfers want the best of both worlds. They want to take the money, but they also want to continue to play in America for the celebrity of it, probably more than anything. So they do want both. I think it just depends. I think probably on whether the public perception of who the Saudis are ever turns. Because you can't be seen as an organization that supports the abuse of women and all the things that they have done, the Saudis. If that ever turns, then you might see a turn, for the a opening of a changing of minds in the PGA. But I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, to me, it's really a game. It's like a game of chicken at this point, right? Like, who breaks first? And I guess maybe it's a three-way game of chicken, because you got Live Golf, the PGA, and you have some of these individual players. Because at some point, if you could see one of these players going, "What am I doing in my career?" And like just putting their tail between the legs and walking back to the PGA or whatever. But it's a three-way game of chicken to me, and I don't know. I don't have a read on how it's going to break right now.
No, but I think the NCAA, the PGA needs to do something. They've lost a significant portion of their top golfers. Are gone.
I don't think golf is a legitimate sport right now in a way, because you just don't. It doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't. You don't have the best. You can't claim you have the best athletes. You don't have a system in which they compete. You've got no rules and regulations about the finance of it. We talked about that. There's differences between the sort of team sports leagues and how they operate, and these kind of independent contractors. And so there's a lot going on. But like right now, like if you were to, and I'm not a golf fan, so I don't know what the next big Grand Slam tournament is, but as a viewer, like you sit down to watch the next Grand Slam tournament, and you're like, what is this? 2 years ago, this was a much different product.
Well, that and the biggest name in golf has reached the end. Also, Tiger
Right.
Woods. He's drove the ratings for what, 20, 25 years or whatever it is. Try not to sneeze here. Sorry. Even if he plays a little bit here and there, it's at some point soon he's going to be gone. I'm sorry. And so yeah, anyway, and so you couple that with losing a bunch of other big names, because Phil Mickelson's old too. He's Tiger Woods' age, but so a lot of these other guys who left are not, and they were going to be around golf for the next 20 years themselves. And yeah, like you said, the PGA can't really claim to have the best golfers in the world anymore. And so, what does that do to the legitimacy of the PGA? What does that do to the legitimacy of the four majors? The Masters, the U.S. Open, the British Open, the PGA Tour Championship. What does that do to them if the best golfers are playing for a bunch of Saudi Arabian princes?
Yeah, no, it's a wild story that just continues to get wilder. So now we talked about the destruction of tradition. We talked about money running roughshod over, many things that we understand sports to have been for the last, chunk decades, so to speak. Um, so we'll end here with a more heartwarming story about the persistence of tradition and new money, which is it looks like they're going to build a giant Field of Dreams baseball facility stadium. It sort of looks like a complex, but basically in the cornfields of Iowa, we will get a cathedral to the tradition and history of baseball. What are the details, Steve?
So this story we found on who13.com, whatever that is. I think that is a local Iowa media site. Iowa to provide $12.5 million for a permanent Field Dream Stadium by Jonathan Turner, dated August 10th. Excuse me. So what's going on here is that the Iowa Economic Development Authority has given a grant of $12.5 million as a part of $16 million in new grants for 3 Iowa projects. And so, yes, so the state is getting involved and now wants to build a giant baseball complex, multi-use stadium where they can host pro baseball, college baseball, other year-round tournament events, all this. People have been trying to do this. Is the most at this point, this is like the most infamous movie set ever created. Because people have been trying to do this for almost since the day when the movie came out. Was that the 80s, right? It was a long time ago at this point.
Yeah,
Was it the 80s?
late 80s, I think. I'll look it up.
So it's more than 30 years old. And there have been other people in the past who tried to do this sort of thing, and because it's literally out in the middle of the cornfields in the middle of nowhere, it never goes anywhere. But this is now the state dumping a significant amount of money into it, so it's more likely that it gets done because of the state grant. It's not necessarily more likely that it becomes a thing, but it's but that is what's going on here. And they've already got Major League Baseball on board. This Field of Dreams game is coming up again this year. It's the Cubs and the Reds. It says Thursday night's Field of Dreams game, and I think what they're talking about is this coming Thursday, meaning the day after this show is released. I think is the week. Krista, what's the date?
Oh, I don't even know. Oh,
I
the date
thought
of the
you were.
movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So it came out in 1989, so just right at the end of the 80s.
Yeah, okay. So I mean that's 33 years ago. And so it's just kind of funny to me that this one movie, and I, to be honest, call me and put me in a minority here, but I never thought Field of Dreams was all that good a movie. I don't know about you, but I always thought it was overrated, personally. And I thought a lot of it made no sense. I don't get the fascination with the Field of Dreams thing at all.
It would not make my top 5 baseball movie list.
No, I mean, again, it was just Kevin Costner seeing ghosts in the middle of a cornfield, and somehow James Earl Jones got involved, and yeah, I could. It's no major league, put it that way.
Yeah, and if you want Black Sox content, just watch 8 Men Out.
Yeah, there you go. Or what was the other one that was pretty good? But anyway, there've been several movies that are way better than Field of Dreams. But anyway, so this is the latest attempt to monetize this movie set. Now that there's a state grant involved, I think it probably gets done, but it remains to be seen whether anybody will actually want to do anything at this place.
Well, if Major League Baseball is in, it'll help for sure.
For one
and
day
they
a
are.
year.
Yeah, but you don't know what kind of fan experience things they'll build. I mean, I think listen, if you're Iowa, anything that is upping your tourism
Yeah, I know. You
draw.
ain't Florida, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So, so you can understand why the state government would put the grants into this because, it makes a lot of sense and you can kind of cottage industry a certain tourism mentality. So I get it from that standpoint. Whether that works or not, remains to be seen. But like I can see the bet, I can see the gamble, right? I can see the ideology behind why to do it. And you're right, it's been persistent. This is not a new, I think we've even talked about like the possibility.
We did another story about this a while ago.
So, obviously there's enough energy and momentum that I think this will probably happen. And I think they would need to almost create like a baseball experience type of thing around it, and that would need Major League Baseball, and you'd have, you'd almost have it be like a version of the Hall of Fame, not you wouldn't enshrine players in that way, but I think it would be a museum of baseball. I think would probably be how they would build it out. And you get all kinds of, you do the College World Series, you do the Little League World Series. I mean, I think you can manufacture crowds in a way, becomes a destination for those kind of events. So it probably makes smart business sense for Iowa, the state, if they pull it off and it's well done.
You could go
But
get Field of Dreams, the movie stuff, and have a
yeah,
little
you could
movie
do all,
set
yeah.
thing. And yeah,
It becomes a staging platform for lots of different tourists, both persistent, I'm going to go because it's a museum, and I'm going to go because of the special event or whatever.
but my
So
point about the state grant is that it's because the state is financing this, it's much more likely that it will happen because the state doesn't
yeah,
care about making money. They have their own, agenda. So always before it's been private businesses that have attempted to do this and it never works out financially. So if they get this big grant, then it probably happens.
yeah, it becomes a public-private partnership, the
Yes.
3 Ps, which is usually the mechanic that gets these kind of things done. It usually takes both sides of that fence for that to work at this scale. So I think maybe one day we'll make both of us will be making a sojourn to the Palace of Baseball in an Iowa cornfield, because I think that's their goal.
I would go if I was ever near there. I would certainly go see it.
We have we have another kind of funny Iowa-based story and baseball, in that now I've probably lost where I was looking at the story, so I can't name anybody. Give me a second. All right, yeah. So this was found in again, we're scout. It's a little bit of it's late summer. It's a little bit slower time period in the sports business. So we're scouring Iowa websites for stories. That's what it seems like. But a guy, J.D. Schulten, I think I got that right, is running for a state, he's for a state legislative seat, and one of his main planks in his why you should elect him is wants to do away with Major League Baseball's or at least lessen Major League Baseball's blackout rules, because he claims that Iowa basically ends up in a no man's land of baseball viewership, which because of blackout rules they can't. The Minnesota Twins, the Kansas City Royals, St. Louis Cardinals, Milwaukee Brewers, and Chicago Cubs are all blacked out for Iowa citizens. So he's running on to make baseball great again, I guess, in Iowa or whatever. But he wants his constituents to be able to watch the Twins.
Make baseball great again. This is a please vote for me. Please, remember me. I will stand out from the rest of my anonymous peers who are also running. I will be the baseball guy. I mean, it's a pretty dumb platform to run on, my goodness. But if it gets some attention, we're talking about him. Other people are talking about him. So in that respect, it's one of these like any kind of press is good press sort of things. It's the dumbest political platform ever, but it's getting them attention.
Yeah. So Iowa, I guess Iowa's the beating heart of baseball.
Apparently so. Why? But I mean, he has a point. Again, I certainly don't think it should be a political issue, but why are all those teams? Why is Iowa in the blackout market of all those teams?
Yeah, it's just because you have these large swaths of places that have no allegiances, and then you've got these
But why
giant.
but why do they all combine on Iowa?
I think it's because Iowa's so central, right? Like, so you do all these things that surround it, and you like large plains, and so these like extended blackout rules because this is like regional fandom.
I guess, but it seems to me it ought to be like Cubs territory or Cardinals, like one of them, not 6 different teams.
Yeah.
And the funny is the point of the blackout rules originally was to make people go to the games. That's the original point of these blackout rules. And of course, how many people are going to travel from Iowa to Minneapolis to see a baseball game? A handful, but you're not going to have people go, the Twins Yankees game in on TV, I'm going to have to go.
Yeah, right. Up, honey, get in the car.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have one other silly baseball story that I'll throw out here that actually covers here because it's the Royals, the Kansas City Royals. We've laughed in the past about the kind of gimmicks that minor league teams will do to bring in fans. And not gimmicks is almost too harsh a word, right? You got to, have fun at the stadium, right? To get someone to go to a double-A baseball game, it can't just be about the baseball on the field. It's a whole experience, right? So that's part of the lore of minor league baseball. Well, the Kansas City Royals have taken a page from minor league baseball, and you could make a case that the Kansas City Royals are just about a half step away from minor league baseball right now anyway. So they have introduced the sandwich, Steve, so I want to know if you would eat this, right, to draw people in. Kind of like, remember that the glazed donut hamburger was a rage in minor league baseball games? Well, get this. A pulled pork sandwich mixed with Reese's peanut butter cups in sandwich form. So pulled pork, ground. So you not only are you pulling the pork, but you're also mashing in Reese's whatever they are called.
Reese's peanut butter cups.
Yeah, peanut butter cups into the pulled pork and then putting that on a bun. Would you eat it?
Well, my cardiologist would fire me as a patient if I ate something like that.
Right.
But putting aside my health-related dietary concerns, there's no way I would eat that. That sounds awful. Again, health concerns aside, I like Reese's peanut butter cups, and I would eat a pulled pork sandwich. But together, it just sounds like the worst thing that's ever been created.
Yeah, I'm pro gimmick. I'm pro try something once, but that's a flavor profile that I'm not quite sure how you even get to.
Yeah, I don't get it. Yeah, I don't get that at all. Good luck to y'all. Hope it works out, but I don't get it.
If you've been to a Kansas City Royals game lately and you have sampled the pulled pork Reese's peanut butter cup sandwich, let us know. Yeah, we want to know. That's a weird one to me. That makes a glazed donut hamburger way more palatable.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds a lot better, to be honest.
All right, Steve. So, what is happening in Hogsty world?
Okay, so we have decided that the Hogsty will be transitioning to one show a week during the season. As opposed to our normal 2 shows a week, we are not going to be doing our post-game show and our separate pre-game show. It will instead be one 1-hour show a week released on Thursday morning. So that is news. But we're gearing up for the season, all that. Seasons of Discontent will come back. I did hear from Matt and Rick. So that is getting ready to come back. So check that out. And we have all of our regular written content.
Well, there you go. Gearing up for another exciting Commander season, I guess, or the first Commander season, technically. So
this is me being totally ambivalent.
So we will see you in 2 weeks.